Okay, take a look at the artwork that's on the screen. This is a self-portrait. The title says, when I jiggle the table, it does that. It says self-portrait as a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is a Buddhist term, and remember that the sumie art that we're looking at and working with is heavily influenced by the Zen Buddhism. In fact, my book that's behind my easel that you can't see is actually called Zen Ink Paintings, but it's the same thing, sumie, Zen. Not all sumie paintings are influenced by Zen, but most of them are. Bodhisattva, that term means a person who has achieved enlightenment, or a being who has seen their own true nature, and that's kind of like one of the points of Buddhism, is to see into one's own true nature, become enlightened. And so oftentimes the Zen monks that make these paintings will paint portraits of sort of like, you know, when you go to church, you see pictures of the saints and things like that. It's kind of the same thing, except for they're Buddhists. So I'm kind of using that as a template, but I want to ask a question. Does this look like a very realistic portrait?
No.
No. So these portraits tend to be more on the cartoony side, and that's actually a good thing because, well, then we don't have to worry about being so realistic. So yesterday, I made a updated version of this because obviously I don't have the beard and mustache anymore. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing a quick demo on how to do this with the shading and the shadow towards the end, and then you guys are going to get to do it. We're going to talk more and more, especially when we get into Google Drawing, about design thinking. So design thinking is part of art, but it's also part of lots of other things. Anything that humans create is design. Buildings, video games, music, clothing, art, everything. The shoes on your feet. Someone sat down and drew a picture of those shoes before they started to build those shoes and make those shoes, okay? So that's design, and in order to design something, you have to know what you want the end result to be, and that takes problem solving, planning, and critical thinking, which guess what? You're going to be using those skills the whole entire rest of your life. You won't be able to survive without those. So planning, critical thinking, all of those things. And art is a really great place to learn about those things because art is kind of risk-free. It's expressionistic. So whatever you make is whatever you make. It doesn't necessarily have to have a function other than being what it is. What do I mean by that? That might sound kind of confusing. Well, what is this portrait? What am I going to use it for?
For yourself?
For myself. I'm going to hang it on the wall, or actually, specifically this, what I'm going to use it for is I'm going to keep it in my classroom as example art, just like I kept that one, okay? But it doesn't have to serve a purpose. So that's why art is a great place to learn design thinking. Later on, if you're designing something like a tool or a car or a bridge, that's going to have a specific function, right? And it needs to do its function well. For instance, if you're designing a bridge, if you don't design the bridge very well, probably people are going to die or be injured. Right. Right. Right, and you know, like bridges like the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge has to withstand like really strong earthquakes and stuff. So anyways, so with that, here's what I want you to think about while I am demoing this painting. What expression do you want to show in your self-portrait? Are you going to show a stern look like I have a very concentrated look, like maybe I'm meditating, or maybe I'm thinking very hard about something? Or are you going to have I have another one here, a plain look to your face, just sort of like you're just staring ahead, no expression at all? Or are you going to have a quizzical look? This is more like me looking, and by the way, this one is unique because of the pose. My head is what we call 3/4 turn, so I'm kind of turned sideways, and it's kind of like you're giving that look like, I don't know if I believe you. Or are you going to have a tired or maybe a worried look like this, okay? Or a happy look. You can have a happy look. I'm just going to go with the same thing because it's kind of programmed into my brain and my hands right now, okay? So now I'm going to start the demo. You need to watch this part, okay? And you're not doing anything yet. You don't have a paper in front of you. You're just watching, and I will do this as quickly as I can, and then it will be your turn, okay? So first things first, your brushes are dry. So what's the first thing we do with these? You get it wet, right? So you're gonna take your brush and you're gonna, you don't need to do that. Well, I mean you can if you want to, but you don't need to do this until you're actually painting. But all I'm doing right now is I'm loading the brush with water, and then I'm gonna take that water. This is brand new ink, so you're gonna want to dilute it because you don't want it to be pitch black. It actually flows a little bit better if you add water to it anyways, and it still stays pretty black. Remember, you load the brush by just kind of rolling it in the ink, and then most important step is this right here. What is this called? Does anybody remember? Starts with a D. It's what you do when you wake up in the morning before you come to school, hopefully. No, not design. Dress the brush. Why didn't you say it? You could have just said it. You dress the brush. You get the brush ready to go to the painting. You dress it. That does two things. It pushes out any excess ink that you don't want. You don't want your brush to be overloaded because then the ink's going to flow a little bit too freely. Just chill and listen, okay? When you need stuff, I'll get you stuff. Oh, and you guys can't see over there. All right. So dressing the brush, and then once you're done with that, hopefully you've had a good amount of time to think about what you're going to paint. I already know what I'm going to paint, so I'm going to actually... Are we ready? Are we ready? Savannah? Well, your eyes aren't on the screen, so you're not ready. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to start with the eyes. Why am I going to start with the eyes? Well, they're kind of the emphasis of the portrait. They're the part of the face that shows the most expression, the most feeling, or even sometimes you can look at someone's eyes and guess what they're thinking. Guess, because you're not always going to be right, right? Now I'm going to go, since I have this 3/4 turn here, I'm going to next go to this little line because that's probably the next important part of my portrait here. And remember, we're not worried about it being 100% accurate. It doesn't have to look exactly like me. It's like a caricature or a cartoon is one way to think about it. Nose is next. In a 3/4 turn, you're only going to see really mostly one side of the nose. Oh, you know what? I remember one thing I forgot to get you guys was a mirrors. So I'll make sure I get those for you before you start painting. Now the eyebrows. I'm doing the eyebrows pretty much just like we did Bodhidharma's eyebrows. Remember, we kind of just did that sort of zigzagging brush stroke. I've got old man wrinkly forehead, so I'm going to do that.
I have that too. I have that line on my phone.
Make a little correction to my nose, make it a little bit more rounder there. So if you're gonna do a pose like this where your head is turned mostly to one side, then everything is gonna be on one side slightly shorter in length. So like my upper lip right here is slightly shorter than this side. It's not because my mouth is asymmetrical, it's because of the point of view that you're looking at my face. So if I'm turning my head this way slightly, the point of view is going to make one side appear longer than the other. Does that make sense? Good, good. All right, I'm going to finish the rest of my bald head. And then my ear, I kind of have big, huge ears that stick out. Neck. Try to fit what you can if you have enough space. Don't make your portrait tiny, by the way. Please do not do that. It's going to be too difficult for you to complete it and add details to it if you make it too tiny. You want your portrait to fill the paper up, meaning that there's not very much space around the edges. That's another part of design thinking, is because you're still thinking about the end in mind. So you want to think about how much space your figure is going to take up on the page. The figure is obviously, in this case, me. I'm not wearing a tie today, but I'm just painting one because normally most days I do wear a tie. People who are talking are not hearing the instruction. All right, now My portrait is kind of easy to do because I don't have any facial hair or I don't have any hair on the top of my head, so it's just kind of a plain face. You're of course going to want to go ahead and move in and do your hair. And when you do that, you'll be using the mirror to show the shape of your head. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do shading. So I have ink still in my brush that's pretty dark. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add more water to it by dipping it into the water and allowing it a little bit of the ink to kind of leach out into the water, and at the same time the water seeps into the bristles and takes the place of that ink. So now I have a lighter gray. I'm going to test that because I don't want it to be too dark. Okay, we can always go darker, but once we have a dark ink down on the paper, can we pick it back up again? No. So that's pretty good. So I'm going to work with that, maybe get just a little bit more water because I put some down on the napkin. And now what I'm going to do, if your face is turned to the side, one side is going to appear darker, and that's the side that's turned away. Because think of it like this. Light is shining down on my head. Most of it's going to be hitting this side. Less of it's going to be hitting this side. Not to mention the fact that my eyebrow, my nose, and the folds of my face are going to be casting shadows over here. So if you decide, and you don't have to, you can do a straight-on portrait if you want. If you decide that you want to do a 3/4 turn like this to make it a little bit more interesting, make the side that's turned away slightly darker. You would have some shadows up here. I would have shadows around the wrinkles in my forehead. There's always a shadow right here. Okay, it's a little tricky because if you're male, males and females differ in facial structure. And here's one major way that they differ. Females' foreheads tend to not stick out as much as males do. Males have a more pronounced brow. Other shadows. I probably will have a shadow around this area because I have a cheekbone that sticks out. I'm going to have a shadow underneath my bottom lip because my bottom lip sticks out and casts a shadow over my chin. I'm going to have shadows underneath my nose for the same reason. My nose sticks out and casts a shadow. I'm going to have shadow areas around my eyes. I may even want to layer some shadows. So I might want to come back over here with a little bit more ink and make an even deeper shadow around my eye because my eye area is darkened. And the reasoning for that is my eyes sit in a hole in my skull called the orbital socket. So they actually go in. And my eyes pop out, my brow goes around it. That's also an evolutionary reason. It protects your eye. If you fall down, you're going to smack your eyebrow, not your eye, and not be blinded. I might have some shadows on the side of my head here. I might have some shadows around the bottom of my collar on my shirt. How do we know where there are shadows?
We don't.
How can we find out? What can we do? What tool can we use?
A mirror.
A mirror. So if you don't know where the shadows are, look in the mirror, which you will be getting.